Welcome once again to the Agon Institute of Sports Ministry. It's great to have you with us, and we are continuing on in our journey together. My name is Jonathan Detweiler. This is Dr. Greg Linville, and it's a privilege to be with you as we've been looking into our heritage and the realm of muscular Christianity. And we've been going from the roots now to the models, and we're moving from the models into specifically a broader perspective on the YMCA, which has played such a vital role and historically was such a big part of this movement. And so, we're just grateful that you've joined us, whether you're doing this for credit or for your own personal study. It's a privilege to have you with us, and I'm excited about what we're going to learn today. We've been tracing our roots back all the way. More recently, a couple of the guys we looked at were D.L. Moody and most recently Billy Sunday. And now we are looking at Robert McBurney, who I know Greg is one of your favorite guys, at least for his name anyway.
Robert Ross McBurney.
So, welcome, and I'll just turn it over to you and let's get started.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate you being here and doing this together. And Jonathan and I served together on the CSRM staff, and Uncharted Waters and CSRM have come together to create the Agon Institute. And so we're glad that you're availing yourselves of this opportunity for your own training and equipping. And one of the things that we're trying to do in this models course, Jonathan, is give people a number of different perspectives from historical models from which they can then build their own contemporary and future models. And we've had a number of people that we've looked at that have been influenced by the Y. The founder of the Y, George Williams, and then the Stud brothers, who influenced the Y, but also were influenced by some of what came out of the Y. Of course, D.L. Moody and Billy Sunday were both on the staff of the YMCA and got their early ministerial training, and both credited the Y with giving them what they needed to be ministers of the gospel. Today, the Y is largely overlooked within the sports outreach movement, particularly in the West. It's more evangelical in other parts of the world today, but largely overlooked as for its role in creating what it did today in terms of helping the sports outreach movement become what it has become. And so this muscular Christianity era that took place starting early to mid 1800s, lasting up into the early 1900s, the YMCA and the muscular Christianity movement, I have a hard time telling which one was the engine and which one was the fuel. But they went together regardless of which was which. And if we can wrap our heads around a lot of what happened there, it will help us today to know how to do models going forward, today and forward. Robert McBurney is what I call the heir to the movement, the YMCA movement. Williams started it and got things really going, but then McBurney took it to a new level. On your first page of your PowerPoint notes, and if you don't have your notes sheets, you need just to put the video here on pause and go get them and come back, because you need to fill the blanks in, particularly if you're taking this for credit, and take exam quality notes beyond. Let's begin where we started on all of these. Who was he? Where did he grow up? Well, he was an Ulster Scot, meaning that he had a Scottish background, but he was born and raised in Northern Ireland. He was the Protestants of the Protestant Catholic problems that we've seen just hundreds of years, sadly. I guess part of the reason that I'm attracted to him is because that's where my roots came from as well. My great-grandpa came from the Ulster part of Northern Ireland. And I understand some of what was going on then with McBurney. His father was a very prominent physician, surgeon, and an ardent anti-Catholic. Now, that in that era proved his following Christ in his culture. It's not necessarily something that we advocate today, but you have to understand the time. His mother, Nee Ross, meaning her maiden name was Ross, thus Robert Ross McBurney, was an ardent Methodist, which was also a little bit outside of the Presbyterian Calvinistic Scots background. And it was said that his mother really was one that kind of helped install the godly character in Ross, and a little bit more tempered than maybe coming from his father. Was the first of 3 wives to his father, and that was the case for my great-grandfather. He had 3, died in childbirth, a lot of them. The first 2 of great-grandmothers, my great-grandmother died in childbirth, and the third woman refused to have children with my great-grandfather for some reason. This is all part and parcel of the time. But his mother, just like just like Billy Sunday's mother did, impressed him with the hymns. And it's interesting how many times these great men of God, great women of God, are influenced by godly mothers who love the hymns. I can speak to my own mom. My mom sat at the piano and played the hymns, and it's part of the reason why today that I love them. So, moms listening out there, or guys that are married to moms, never overlook the roles of mothers in raising ministers of the gospel. As an early adult, he left Ireland in 1854. He was 18, and he came to America, a very poor immigrant. His first job was in the hat business, and in fact, it was a business that was associated with the Harrison family that produced 2 presidents of the United States. And he got into some of that early industrial foundations there, if you will. And yet, during the Civil War, when all the top hats weren't as popular anymore, they went out of business. And he had to look for work. In 1856, so he's now 20, 2 years after he lands, he joined the North Dutch Church on Fulton Street and a noontime prayer meeting. And this would be a time where they could take a break from work and they would go and they would pray. And he was greatly impressed there by a preacher by the name of Theodore Cuyler. And again, how many of these guys have been impressed by preachers? And he joined then the Mulberry Street Methodist Church, going back to his mother's roots a little bit, and he remained a member there until his death. Now, one of the things that I have, Jonathan, and you might speak to this, is a problem that I have with people who work in paraministries and they're not members of a church. They're on the staffs of a Christian paraministry that's sports related, but they don't become members of church. Thoughts about that?
Well, I think people are so busy. I think their lives are their priorities are different, and it was a different era back then. And I think it's something we need to come back to, because you need to be invested at the local level, giving your time and your energy into the people within your own community, and to be a part of a local fellowship, a local body. So to be involved in the ministry is good, but the local church is really where you find the fellowship, the connection, the intimacy, I think, with God through people that allows you.
Teaching, the accountability.
Exactly.
I just think it's inexcusable.
Well, it's community. We need community. Yeah. And if you don't have that community there, you find it somewhere else, but it doesn't fulfill the same type of role or needs that you have to grow in your faith and to become the leader He wants you to be.
And if for no other reason, we know that the elite athletes and coaches that we work with, that unless they are intimately involved in a local church, they don't grow as Christians. And if they see you and I as paraministry leaders, and I serve as an executive director of a paraministry, you're on the staff.
Right.
If they don't see us intimately involved in a local church, they're going to say it's not that important. And eventually they go.
And you're not dismissing parachurch ministries
Not
at
at
all
all.
in this. You're just underscoring
I
the
work for
importance
one.
and the value of being a part of a local church and
Absolutely.
invested in a local church.
So McBurney joined the church, and he was a member his entire life. Now, his coming to America was much to the chagrin of his surgeon father, who expected Robert to follow in his footsteps, particularly when he began to work for the exorbitant amount of money of $5 a week at a Y kind of organization. Now, this is 1854, 56. The first YMCA was in Boston in 1854. Now, this is New York City that he's at. And the first one in North America was in Montreal just a few months before Boston. So the Y movement was kind of coming out of some other things, and he was employed there in that group. But now the hat business goes out of business. He's trying to figure out what he's going to do. Making $5 a week is not what he had anticipated. He liked that work, but he said, no, I'm supposed to be a businessman. But he couldn't shake the call to the YMCA ministry. He just couldn't shake it. So when the hat business failed, he got a call to go to Philadelphia to work with Wanamaker there in his great department store. And yet, he called that, by the way, his Jonah experience, that he was turning his back on what God had called him to do. But he came back within a few months. And this is what happened. This is the why he came back and why he stayed in the Y. Just before he left for Philadelphia, and this group had become the YMCA, and he was working there, he had a life-changing experience. He found a young man sitting in the Y library, and the Y was made up of libraries to a large extent at that point. They didn't have physical work yet, meaning sports and recreation and physical fitness. He realized that this man, over this holiday, was not only just lonely, but without the Lord. He was in need of a Savior. That man, over that holiday, received Christ through McBurney's one-on-one personal evangelism. And that experience so put a hook into McBurney that he went to Wanamaker, went to the department store, was making a lot of money, but he couldn't get rid of that call. And so he went back. His biographer, Doggett, said, quote, "His service in the association had made him restless in any calling which did not directly contribute to winning men to Christ." I pray that you would have that. I pray that I would have that. That we are restless unless we are winning men to Christ. And so he went back. And he took the YMCA and he said, we've got to do something different and better and more. And so this began then his researching days. He began to search and survey the community. And then out of that research, he became a planner. And out of that planner, he became an implementer. And out of that implementation, he became a master builder of buildings and people, and then a vision caster for people way beyond just his building. And he became eventually the philosopher of the YMCA. Why does the YMCA exist? And then in his latter years became the mentor of passing on. Well, let's take a look at these individually. The researcher. Seaford Brainerd is the guy that you see in front of you. And he was a man that worked with McBurney. McBurney had this great ability to understand the giftedness of people and utilize their skills for the kingdom. And what they found in this research with Brainerd surveying the community in New York City, this was early 1860s, hundreds of gambling tables, 730 houses of prostitution, 3,400 female prostitutes, 8,000 bars. Now, that told them that there was this great need. So from there, grabbing hold of the research, he began to plan. And what they said was needed, and this would be page 7 now of your notes, they needed a, quote, Christian alternative. And so they planned a facility which would, quote, silently bring young men within the spheres of its influence, end quote. You have that building called the 23rd Street building. And you see there that this is the building that McBurney had planned and then later built once he got the research on his community. This building cost $487,000 to build. Now we're talking about in the late 1800s. We would be talking upwards to $10 million or better today. And it became the catalyst for the New York City YMCA, this building, and for McBurney personally. And it catapulted both of them into a national position of leadership and influence. And people streamed the rest of his life into his office to seek his advice and consultation. Never overlook what a building can do for you. And never overlook also, as we get into this, sometimes it can be a detriment. But those of you that are serving in mega churches and you have these incredible facilities, people are going to flock to you. Are you going to be able to give them what they need in terms of their theology and philosophy and not just the building methodology? They're going to come to you for all these things. And you have to recognize that to whom much is given, much is required. And you that are sitting in mega churches, it's your responsibility to help those that have no facility. Help them to know what they can do. Give back, or as they say, pay it forward to others that are coming along. McBurney understood this. You see at the top of the building, you'll see a couple of the rotundas up on the top. This would have been his apartment that he stayed at, that we'll come to a little bit later. But Jonathan, this is a philosophy, it's a model to build something that people will come. One of our great churches in a country that's in the Middle East has built a state-of-the-art camp so that people can come and they're attracted to the sport, but they hear about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You have examples. You know of how people are doing that around the world.
Right. Yeah, I think, the 2 points that you've touched on, researcher and planner, are foundational. And out of that planning, you decide whether it's relevant for your culture. Because in some cultures, it is very much a part of your ministry, and it needs to be a focus. In others, maybe not so much. And so I think it's a determining factor what your setting is, what your calling is, what your vision is, based on your research, and then it determines the next step for your planning.
And when we consult with people within CSRM, what we say is you've got to survey your community.
Right.
You survey your community first, you survey your church second. And then you start to survey what resources you might have outside of your church. So we do what we call drawing a map. The map tells you where you are, where you came from, how you got there, and where you can go. Mm-hmm. And are we going to take the highway, the motorway, or are we going to take a circuitous scenic route?
Right.
And we look first at the community. What are the leisure pursuits of a community? What are their needs? What's being done well? What's being done terribly? Even if there's a large numeric group of youth baseball in your area, but what is called coaching is really child abuse, maybe you need to start doing youth baseball, even though it's large numbers. So you look at your community. Obviously, if it's not being done, you can probably do something.
Right.
Now, going back to our cricket, unless you're in maybe a culture that has some Pakistanis or
India or
India,
the UK.
yeah.
Even,
in America,
Australia.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend cricket unless you're targeting some of those communities.
But all this leads you to the answers, which then God is working on your heart or telling you, yeah, as a result of this research and these plans, I want you
to go do this.
To go do this. And that may include a building, it may include a gym, it may include a field. And so I think a part of the model we get from this is researching and planning, but it's also trusting God.
That's right.
And allowing Him to provide. Because many of you maybe say, well, I don't have the resources, I don't know where to turn, I don't know how to do that. Well, I don't think McBurney probably knew the answers to those questions either by the time he was moving forward and God had given him this vision. So,
and the one thing that he changed for the Y was, up to this point, the YMCA was volunteer. He became the first, well, he wasn't the first, but he was the first that lasted staff person for the YMCA. And he mastered the concept of what a professional YMCA worker looked like. Now, many of our churches today have had volunteers coaching their softball team, organizing a basketball league or a volleyball league. At some point, what we have found is that when a church and senior pastors, if you're in a course for seminary here taking this course, senior pastors, I'm going to tell you that the second person you need to hire, I'm assuming you're the first, is an outreach person. Because as soon as you go to maintenance, you're hiring somebody to watch this or watch that or watch that. You've hired an aquarium keeper rather than a fishers of people. And we need to keep going out after people. And you know what happens when we bring more people in? You have more finances to hire those aquarium keepers. And so this is what McBurney understood, is that he needed to go on staff so that he could put full-time efforts into this, and he would continue to reach out. Well, on the 9th slide you have there, you'll see what he built over the course of about 25 years. Building after building after building. He didn't stop with the 23rd Street building. That was the catalyst to build all these other ones. To take over some things and remodel them and to build from scratch. And during that 25 years, the membership increased, I don't even know what the percentage, but it went from 151 to over 8,300 in just that 25 years. And that they averaged nearly 5,700 people coming to their facilities every day. So this will increase people. Well, he became the vision caster. He went and learned, and he did. And then he began to teach. And that's how our lives are. And for you as a sports minister, you need to learn. Hopefully that's why you're taking this course through the Agon Institute. You are a learner. And we spend about the first third of our life where that's the primary thing we do. The second third of our ministry, the primary thing we do is doing it. And then the third third, which sadly I'm in some ways, is that we teach others. Now, it's not you start at age 20 and 15, you're 65 and you're retired. It could be 5 and 25 and 10 or whatever, but it is in those thirds. And if you're as a sports minister, if you're not developing yourself, you're not getting your degrees. If you're taking this just for certification, you're never going to take a degree. Those of you that are taking a degree, kudos to you. You're not preparing yourself for the future. There comes a time that you're going to have to start to teach. You need to get the degrees. You need to prepare yourself for these degrees. So that vision caster now is that to get out to everybody else what you've learned. Now, here's a quote from McBurney himself. It would be difficult to exaggerate the importance of the social element as a factor in willing and holding young men in right paths. Did you catch that? Okay, so do the social, do the reading rooms, do the sports, do the stuff so they can hold them. Now back to the quote. Much has been done by the association in these directions in the YMCA, but more should be done. If the young stranger is to be helped from falling into bad social surroundings by the association, its rooms must become a center of magnetic social power. Does your sports ministry, is it the kind of place that people just want to come and hang out? Now, if you're doing this in a local church, or you're running a sports camp for a para-ministry, I'm going to tell you that it's rare that any of your people will remember the score of the game or who won the league. What will they remember? How they were treated, how they felt, were they loved, was it done with excellence? And that's what McBurney's is saying. We've got to do something to hold them so that the gospel can permeate through their heart and soul. Well, it obviously became the philosopher, and on page 11, here's some of the philosophies. The work shall be for young men only. It was a young men's Christian association. But the welfare of the whole man is to be promoted. The third point there. Avoid controversial doctrines. The fourth one. The best Y members are church members of deep spiritual vitality. Remember this, para-ministries. Churches have prior claims to Y members. Money to come from those interested in young men. Go to your fast ships if you're trying to raise money. Who is really interested in your particular ministry? For him, it was young men. Moral reform and political parties are to be avoided. He basically said you're going to offend people if you get involved in politics. And so stay out of politics, but love all politicians. And he said there should only be one Y to exist in each city. Now, whether you agree with that or not, this was his philosophies. Now, let me give you this quote. The best thing for you and me is to engage in earnest Christian work for the bodies and the souls of men. We might discuss creeds till doomsday, and I do not think anybody would be helped by it. It is touching men's hearts and lives for Christ that is our business, since we believe that we have been redeemed by His precious blood, and that today He is our advocate before the throne. I would advise you to come into heart touch with men, lost men, men who are astray. And when you come to make every effort to lead such men into right living, you will be more and more impressed with the fact that only by God's Spirit and through a new Spirit begotten in them by the Holy Ghost are they really to be helped. I mean, Jonathan, this guy has got wisdom for us.
He's really laying it on the line there, and he's saying, major in the majors and minor in the minors. And what is major? The gospel. Focus on Jesus.
Evangelistic disciple making.
Yes.
All right, that's the philosopher. The mentor, R.C. Morse, was the writer and communicator. R.C. Morse's, his uncle was the Morse of Morse code. These were communicators. They knew how. Morse became the writer. Weidensaul became the expansionist. He got on the railroad, and wherever it ended, he started a YMCA across the country. Brainerd, we know already, was the researcher. Vanderbilt, Brainerd as well, and the Dodge brothers of Dodge fame, finances. Many young men he was a mentor to. I mean, he challenged them to go into the YMCA work all the time. Here's another quote from him. This is what he says that the YMCA secretary was responsible for. A YMCA secretary, think executive director today. The reaching of young men. He may have a model educational work, a good physical department, large meetings, and a thorough social atmosphere. But if he has not a band of workers who are personally reaching young men and winning them from sin to righteousness, from the world to the church of Jesus Christ, he is not fulfilling his responsibility. You can't get any clearer about what the YMCA is supposed to be doing. And if you are in a local church and you have coaches in your league and they are not fulfilling their responsibility if they are not personally reaching people for Christ. All right, so what are some of the keys to McBurney's success? Well, we may not like this one, but he was a lifetime bachelor. He worked 80, 100 hours a week Beyond that, he had a quality of relationship with influential people and resources, a keen political mind, a sagacity that was unparalleled, administrative skills and organization, a commitment and an ability to develop leadership and mission workers. Buildings are magnets. Facilities attract. He was the original purpose-driven life guy. Warren has learned from him. Stay on your course. Here's a couple other quotes. This is from his biographer. He surrounded himself, surrounded himself with gifted people of quality and who were qualified in skills and abilities that complemented his own. Now, if you're afraid to associate with people that are stronger than you are, you're not a good leader. You've got to attract people that have better gifts than you, are higher quality than you, and give them some room to go and be who they need to be. This also from Doggett, his biographer. Preeminent in this man's life, as his dominating love was the ever-present and ever-ready concern he had for men's salvation. Did you catch that? It was hardly possible to come into personal contact with McBurney without feeling his interest in one's eternal welfare. Do people know that about you? On every hand, he made it his business in an engaging and tactful way to establish such relationships as would impress men with this interest. In a direct and loving way, he made a personal impression upon thousands of young men. He personally, not just his leaders, but him personally. Back to the quote. His cordial, earnest greeting, his hand, his look, the few words that he spoke lifted the life he touched. Multitudes of young men owed to his efforts their personal salvation, and hundreds of others have been led by him to devote themselves to the ministry. I wish that could be said of me. Here's the last thing that I want to quote from his biographer. He says that even McBurney's failings he turned into positives. Quote, his chief failing, an occasional, notice that, occasional, brusque, over-dominant way, native to that Scotch-Irish character, I resemble that remark, was often turned to account for the deepening of attachments between himself and his friends. For even out of brief understandings grew reconciliations, which more clearly showed the fervor of his love, which more strongly welded others to himself. You are going to make mistakes, and you are going to need to make apologies. And you are going to need to be able to, as a leader, humble yourself and get down on your knees and ask for forgiveness. And you're also going to need to get your stuff out of the way to be able to build relationships and networks with people. You've got to be willing to go these extra miles. And you know what's going to happen? When that soccer mom or that basketball dad walks into your office at the local church and they're complaining, or that camper that didn't have the great experience, or maybe that pro athlete that you're working with in chapel is offended by something that you said or did or didn't do, don't walk away from it. Don't bury it. Attack it in a loving and a sensitive way. Admit where you were wrong. Go to them humbly and say, can we work this out? What can we do? No matter how many times a ministry rejects you to be a partner with you, can you go back and say, but if we work together, think what can happen for the kingdom? This ability that McBurney had literally impacted the entire world because he modeled forgiveness. He modeled reconciliation. He modeled what he needed to do. Here's the last quote from Kenneth Scott LaTourette about McBurney. He was warmly evangelistic, not cold, austere, in your face. He was warmly evangelistic. He had a genius for friendship. and through personal contacts won many to the Christian faith. And you see the two pictures there of him in that upstairs room of the 23rd Street building where he invited so many men in. Let me finish, Jonathan, the story that I began earlier about McBurney. So here's this young man, Jonathan, who is on shore leave, and he's in the YMCA. And McBurney, when he walks in, not only recognizes from his dress and his gear that he's a sailor, kind of a merchant marine, but he's also, from his accent, that he's from the other side of the pond, and they can bond. And now, through this time together, over the next 24, 48 hours, McBurney leads him into a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And the young man unloads his story to McBurney and says that he actually joined the Merchant Marine as a kind of a rebellious statement and wanting to get away from his parents, get away from the church, and get away from all that he saw as kind of being oppressive. And McBurney tried to help him understand how it was really a good thing, and he obviously came to that faith and saw it as a really good thing. That's the thing that McBurney couldn't get rid of when he went to Philadelphia, and why he came back to the YMCA to work and give his life to the YMCA. That one time. But his story doesn't end there. Because years later, remember, McBurney becomes this person who mentors and the visionary and the philosopher. And there was a group of people that came to the YMCA, that 23rd Street building that McBurney was at, and they were asking for his opinion and seeking out how they could make their YMCA better. Well, you know what? They also had an accent from overseas, and he knew they were coming from the UK, and he was excited about that. And began to get to know them and find out a little bit about them, and found out their names. And he said, would you happen to know a young man by the name of, which was the name of that young man that had been in his office years before? And they both looked at each other, mom and dad, and said, that's our son. And he said, whatever happened to him? I never heard. And they said, and at this point, they're in tears. And they tell the story about how on the voyage back to England that he was swept overboard and he was lost. And he died out in the ocean. But before he left New York, oh, here goes the light, we're in a third world country. Before he left New York, he posted a letter to them telling them about how he had met this man in a YMCA that led him to Christ, and that he was coming back home to pursue Christ for his life. They did not know before, the parents and McBurney did not know before the end of the story. But Jonathan, what a powerful story. I have tears in my eyes now to think about how Christ navigates all these things together. But here's what happened. Parents raised a kid in the way you should go. The kid left, but because there was this YMCA, this, if you will, sports minister that had built this building to welcome people in and sat one-on-one with him and ministered to that person, the parents' lifelong prayers were answered because of that man. Those of you that are watching this video, this is the great opportunity you have to be able to build buildings and to do sports outreach, to create an atmosphere in which people can come in and that you get a chance to sit with them one-on-one and be the person who helps that person come to a faith in Christ and is the answer to maybe generations of prayers. My great-grandfather that came from the same place that Robert Ross McBurney came from. He prayed for me, but he didn't even know my name. But he prayed for his descendants. And because somebody who was a sports minister started talking to me about Jesus, my great-grandfathers and my grandfathers and my parents' prayers was fulfilled.
That's a great way to end, yeah. Well, you know what else strikes me is that McBurney was God's man at that time for that moment.
Oh.
And he stepped into the opportunity. And you look at, you went through the list of things that he was, as a researcher and a planner and on into a philosopher, and you can read the whole list. He had specific talents and gifts.
Absolutely.
That God said, I need this man right now for this job and this position. And I want him to use these talents and gifts to do something and build something larger than himself. So it was big, but you know what? It started with one person at a time. That young man who just came into the building.
But it was always as small as an individual.
Right. And so I think that's one of the greatest lessons that you can take out of this session. To understand that God has appointed you to be his man at this time to do the task that he's given to you. And it starts with relationships, one person at a time.
I couldn't agree more. I think you summarized it well. And in one sense, I apologize for the emotion, but in another sense,
it's real. That's what this is about. It's real.
That's my passion. That's why I'm doing what I do, because I want other people to join in this movement, so those sailors that are looking for a port can come to faith in Christ. So please, now, draw your models, grab what God has given you out of this, and begin to think about how is he going to use you. All right, we're going to be moving next time.
Wrap it up. So what are we on next time, Greg?
We're going to continue with the YMCA. We're going to talk about Dr. Luther Gulick and how he created some models for us. And we're going to just keep moving through, and we've got some more of our pioneers in the future. We're looking forward to you being with us.
Great. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jonathan Detweiler. This is Dr. Greg Linville. Have a great day wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Bless you.